Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Alrighty, here we are once again. Learn Photography with Duck. I am your host, Duck, and happy Easter, everybody, and April Fools. I got a note that today is also my wedding anniversary with Diane.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. We chose April 1st, so that way she can tell people she married a fool. No, actually, she picked it so she knew I wouldn't forget. But guess what? I still forget. So anyway, today is Lightroom edition. We got some interesting stuff for you. It's all about color today. So hopefully you'll learn something interesting. Coming up, we got through our local PPA chapter, CTPPA, we got photographing families for fun and profit. Ooh, I missed a little space there for fun and profit. Anyway, if anybody's interested, this is it sounds like she's going to be covering a lot. Now, Allison is a master photographer. She is very well known. She's published books. She's a high-end family photographer down in the Weston area. And she's going to be covering a lot, everything from the business side to the camera side. So if you're interested in people photography, if you're interested in doing any kind of family photography, seniors, things like that, even if it's not people, if you're interested in like pet photography, a lot of what she covers is going to apply as well. So if you're interested, go to ctppa.com and you can register through there. Okay. And Bill, you wanted to mention something?
Yes, this week, tomorrow, North Haven Camera Club has a presenter. His name is Mark Howd, and his topic will be creating stories with photographs and video. And so, Mark will share his experiences with the art of storytelling through pictures and moving pictures, and how we can be better storytellers with our cameras. He'll discuss using images, words, audio, and video to engage our audience.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll do some techniques, not too much. So this is tomorrow at North Haven Camera Club, exit 9 in North Haven, and the address is at Hope Christian Church. The address is 211 Montouise Avenue. And this Wednesday is, I know it's the distance for some people in Fairfield County. We're having the opening reception for Snappy Senior Photographers at Plainville Public Library, 4 to 7 o'clock. We'll have some goodies. They won't let us have alcohol in our buildings, unfortunately. I did ask. And
Yeah,
so
little wine tasting.
the exhibit there is till the 19th. And we have about 75 photos.
Nice.
And considering we're a group of amateurs, pictures are quite good.
Cool.
And so then on the 22nd, we move it over to the Senior Center, and that opening reception will be on the 24th at 10:30 a.m. at Plainville Senior Center. If you Google Plainville Library, or if you go into maps and you type Plainville Public Library or Plainville Senior Center, you'll find them.
Mm-hmm.
So this Wednesday at the library at 4, Wednesday the 24th at 10:30 a.m. at the Senior Center.
Cool. I mentioned it to my wife, and she is interested in going. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can go Wednesday because I have a doctor's appointment at 3:30. But maybe after, who knows? We'll think it's going from what time? From 4 to what?
4 to 7.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I might be able to stop, but if not, definitely at the senior center. So
All right.
looking forward to that. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to share?
Milford Photo is doing pet photography 7:30. That's online at 7:30. Milford Photo this Wednesday.
Oh, cool, cool,
I
cool.
think that's probably an hour-long presentation. Most of
Yeah,
them,
usually, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Bill, if you want to drop some information about the Plainville show in the chat, that way people
I'm
can.
I'm going to put it on the. Yeah. Can I do it on the chat?
Yeah, just
Oh, I can send a picture. Yeah.
throw it. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
God.
Awesome.
Grab this. Okay.
Cool. Appreciate it. All right. So, like I said, today we're going to discuss a little bit about color. I had I had a fun time going into New York City with Greg, Greg Horn, and on when was it? Thursday, Wednesday? I can't even remember what day it was. Man, talk about being completely out of it, right? It was on the 28th. Okay. All right. Anyway, we went to New York, and we were there pretty much for the goal was to go to the Macy's Flower Show, and at it was my first time there. He'd been there before, actually to Macy's, never to a flower show, but he's been to Macy's. So we really didn't know what to expect, you know. But when we walked in, it was like pretty impressive. They had it was basically on the main floor. It was hosted by Dior. And there were flowers everywhere, you know, all kinds of displays. And I went crazy photographing stuff. And I noticed that they had a theme, a color theme, and it was, you know, pretty much red. They had a section of the mezzanine which was literally just roses, red roses everywhere. But overall, all of the displays, the main color was red. So I went around taking all kinds of photos of all the different displays and flowers and things like that. And which led me to today's presentation about colors, because I know some of you like photographing flowers, whether out in the wild or, you know, back home in a you know, more controlled situation. But the one thing I noticed with most digital cameras is that they have a hard time rendering red. Red tends to really mess with the sensor, and every time I photograph anything red, it always seems to the red kind of just blows out, looks oversaturated, and just kind of nasty looking. There's kind of like no edge definition. There's no subtle tonalities. It just kind of just overpowers everything. So I figure, you know, since I have all these images with red in it, we'll create something and how to control that. Okay. So what I did is I just kind of went through and I picked some random stuff. Let me just switch my screen real quick and do a screen share. There we go. All right, everybody can see the screen good? Okay. All right, so these are the images that I'm going to use for today's lesson. And what you're looking at here are the edited images, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what the edited image looks like. And you know, I think the video is going to kind of mess a little bit with the red as well. So hopefully this comes across, but let me see. Here we go. This is the edited. Oh, I know why. There we go. And this is the before. Okay. So before, after, before, after. All right. Next one. This one was, I loved this part of the display. They had these columns, you know, along the kind of like the center part of Macy's from the entrance in. And it was just columns of texture with these flowers. All right, and this is the before. I mean, I'm sorry. This is the after and before. Oh, wait a minute. Am I showing the right one here? Hold on one second. Oh, I know why. It's because it's a virtual copy. Damn. That's what it is. Virtual copy won't let me. Oh, no, it should. Hold on. Hold on. It's not letting me show the before and after. Okay. I don't know why. Let me see. Okay, well, here, this is the before and this is the after. Before and after. Okay. And what I want you to notice, in particular, this one is everything has this overall red cast because the influence of red was so strong within the image itself that, you know, we have all this red light just bouncing right back into the camera that it kind of washes out everything with this kind of like this blended red from all the different colors. So it's not like any one strong color of red stands out. It's just this homogenized red from all of that that just kind of washes everything out. All right, and you know, in post-production, you kind of want to make a little bit of visual separations. All right, this next one, this was a butterfly display. And I got to give credit to Greg because he spotted it and he says, "Oh, we got, you know, this little abstract looking design here." All right. And again, because the majority of it is red, it influences everything else. And in this particular display, the stripes in the butterfly wings were actually black. But if we look at it here, they don't look black at all. All right. So what I want to do is make this look a little bit more like how I saw it on that day. Again, because there's so much red light hitting the sensor, it kind of just gives it a wash of red. All right, and this is the after. Okay. Towards the back of Macy's, they had a little candy shop. It literally felt like walking into Willy Wonka's because they had just bins of different types of candies. And I went around taking photos of different stuff because I thought, this is pretty cool, lots of texture, but it's very monochromatic. It's a lot of red. And again, we have this very strong red influence that, you know, not only influences the candy, but it also influences the shadows and the highlights. So we lose a little bit of color contrast, all right? And this is what I edit it to. All right, and then the last image was this one, a little bit underexposed. Um, this was taken kind of like in the shadow part of one of the displays, so it wasn't getting any light, any ambient light from the room. Not that the light was anything to really write home about, but uh, this one in particular was pretty interesting because it allowed me to separate the red flower against all that yellow background. So that was kind of cool. All right, and this is the final edit where I boosted the contrast between the colors a little bit more and brought out the detail. All right, so those are the sample images that we're going to go through, and I want to show you how I tackled each particular problem, and what to look out for, because the thing when it comes to color, let me just take this one. Okay. The thing with color is when you have a color that's already pretty well saturated, you have to be careful how you manipulate the exposures, all right, your shadows, your highlights, your midtones with something like this, because what ends up happening is anytime you modify shadows or highlights, you're also going to modify the saturation of the color, all right? And what I find is that red is the one color that really, really, really suffers the most. Or I should say intense red, saturated red is the one that suffers the most for some reason. You're going to find that same effect happens, pretty much across the board with any saturated colors. All right, but I find that the more the color goes into the warm tones, the more you see the saturation degrade the image a lot more. When it goes into the cool tones, we do get some degradation when we start oversaturating, but it's not as destructive, I guess you might say, as some of the warm tones. Okay, so understanding that, we can actually use that to our effect, in order to create a solution for our edits, where we can manipulate the color temperature in order to control oversaturation problems. Okay. All right. So looking at this, we see that, it's a jumble of red, but there's really no strong contrast, with all the strands, because like I said, all this red light that's bouncing back to the camera is influencing everything that the camera sees, including the highlights and the shadows. All right. Let me zoom in here. All right, actually you can see that there really are, even our darkest shadows. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Let's go. Oh, wrong way. Let's go. There we go. Okay. This area here, there should be a really, really deep shadow, is actually a dark, dark red. Okay. And some of these that should be mid-tone shadows, are not so much in the dark red. They're more towards that bright red. All right. So what happens is we don't get a lot of separation, right? So if we look here, there's a strand that kind of goes here, strand that goes there, and a strand that goes there. All right. But if we look at it, there's really not enough contrast there. There's a little bit more contrast here. You can kind of sort of see it. All right. But it's, not that good. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to bring some of these darker tones more towards the black. All right. Now, if we also look at the highlights, all right, we see that the highlights, they're not quite white. They go more towards a yellow. All right. So color hue runs on a spectrum. All right. And as a matter of fact, if we bring up the color wheel, all right, you can see that anything that's red, when it starts getting to the bright side, to the lighter side, is going to start shifting over to the yellow. But as it starts shifting to the shadow side, it's going to shift towards the magenta side. Okay. So understanding this, we can say, okay, we want to control how we shift these colors. Okay. All right. So let me take that out. Let me zoom out. Okay. So typically, how would we create contrast in an image? Anybody want to venture a guess? Throw out 2 cents. How would you normally create contrast in an image?
Well, the contrast lever to begin, the shadow, I mean, you got DAs, you got, there's a lot of, fine tuning, you might say, like DAs are used tiny bit, but
Right.
I think it would start with a contrast.
Okay, so the contrast slider, okay, the dehaze slider. All right, so you understand that contrast is literally a separation pretty much along the mid values, and what we're doing is we're separating them and pushing that mid-tone values closer to white and closer to black, okay, in order to create a little bit of that separation in the midtones. Okay, the haze slider kind of does that, but what it does is it takes everything in the whites and highlights, all right, and the darker tones, it makes it a little bit darker, and then the lighter tones makes them a little darker, but not as dark. So what it's doing is taking that whole range of whites to lights and saying, okay, we're gonna take that and we're gonna create a little bit more of contrast separation within just those tones. All right, there, it does affect the midtones and the darker tones, but not as much. It primarily concentrates on those light tones, okay? But what it's doing is it's creating separation between tonalities, all right? Another way that we can create contrast is with the texture slider, all right? The texture slider kind of works on a little micro scale, and it says, okay, I'm going to look not so much at the full overall tonality of the image. All right, I'm going to look at more kind of sort of pixel by pixel, and I'm going to say, okay, we're going to create little bit of contrast separation along edges, along parts that already have some kind of texture. Okay, and that's what it's doing, is it's kind of enhancing a little bit of the texture that's already there by creating these little micro contrasts just in the texture. Okay, so we can use that to our advantage as well. So let's give it a shot. All right. Now, when the other thing that we can do to kind of piggyback on what Al said about the contrast slider is we can say, okay, well, if the contrast slider just takes everything, goes like this, like Moses separating the Red Sea, all right, we can also do something similar by taking our highlights and taking our shadow sliders and pulling them apart as well. All right, and at that point, we have a little bit more control over what parts of the exposure range we want to manipulate. So, yeah.
What I used to use a lot was definition. And then I found that it makes things too dark. I mean, years ago, if I remember correctly, there was no such thing as texture or even
right.
Or even
clarity.
What's that other one?
Clarity.
I meant to say clarity. I meant to say
Yeah.
clarity. On the phone, it's called definition. I meant to say clarity.
Yeah.
I used to use clarity a lot, and I used to punch it up to 10. And then over time, I thought, wait a minute, this is making things too dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the one thing you have to keep in mind that all sliders are going to affect all global sliders are going to affect the image globally. So if a slider does a specific thing and you find that the side effect also does kind of like this, something that you don't like, what you got to do is identify what it is that it affected and correct it. So, for example, if you use the clarity and you say, oh, it kind of makes it a little bit too dark, then you can say, okay, well, I can open up the shadows to kind of bring that back into control. All right, so let's play around with this. All right, so the first thing that was mentioned is the contrast slider. Okay, so if we push the contrast slider up, okay, what it's wanting to do is it's wanting to separate the image from the midtones, so everything at 50% to white is going to push it into the lights, and 50% to black is going to push it into the shadows. Okay, but as you can see, the majority of the image really does not have a lot of shadows to begin with. So what happens is when we try to push along that 50%, the majority is already, on the wrong side. So it's taking all these midtones and kind of shoving it a little bit over, but there's no shadows to balance it out. So here, for example, let me go before, after, okay. So you notice that it did darken it up a lot, okay. But what happened is all of these that are not quite in the midtones, all right, they're a little bit on the lighter side. They got a little bit oversaturated. So this is before and this is after. I don't know if you guys can see the difference. All right, so now all of a sudden where we had a little bit of missed my drawing. We had a little bit of separation right along here, for example. Okay. Once I push it, there's literally nothing there. It's all just, it's one tonality of red. All right. So this aggravated the situation. It really washed it out. Okay. All right.
No,
So,
question.
yeah.
I noticed you're at 105 millimeter. So you were standing back pretty far on this to get a better separation or contrast. Would it be better be closer?
No, distance wouldn't have mattered because what creates a contrast is the light. So to begin with, the light was terrible. The color balance of the light was terrible. Yeah, so it was a bad shooting situation to begin with. All right. And these barrels with the candy were about at waist level. All right. Or should I say children's eye level. All right, but it was about my waist level. So I was shooting like from up here. Okay. And even and the buckets were, I don't know, a good 10-inch round. All right. So I didn't want to catch the edges. I wanted to fill the frame with the candies. So that's why I kind of went with the 105, zoomed in as much as as much as the lens would go. Okay. But because of the focal distance, all right, I couldn't get too close because it's not a macro lens. So I was literally shooting like this up high in order to get the focus. All right. And as it is, I was shooting pretty much wide open. So I didn't have a good depth of focus as well. So bad situation all the way around. So I'm trying to kind of see if I can salvage the image. Okay. All right. So now.
You know what? Yeah, just my thinking, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thinking. Looking at this, and again, I don't know if the situation of the video affects this, but looking at this, it seems to me the first thing I would do is bring down the saturation a little bit.
Okay. We'll give that a shot in a second. Okay. All right. So this is what happens when we go up. Obviously, if we go too high, we're going to really lose that saturation. I mean, the edges, because it's oversaturated. Okay. If we bring the contrast down, all right. Oops, wrong slider. If we bring the contrast down, you'll notice how we get a slightly different effect. Okay. The saturation goes down, right? It doesn't quite go to black and white, okay? But this contrast slider affects our color, All right. So it's not just affecting the tonality, it's also affecting the underlying hue of our image. All right. So once we understand this, then we can say, okay, maybe if I use it in combination with other sliders, all right, because remember what I just said earlier, when you find one slider gives you a bad side effect, what you want to do is compensate for that side effect with something else. As long as what the slider you're manipulating is getting you closer to your final product, okay? So by bringing the contrast down, we can see that we're gaining some edge definition on these strands. This is like licorice spaghetti licorice. All right. So bringing the contrast down, which kind of seems counterintuitive because what we're trying to do is we're trying to build contrast. All right. The contrast slider down is actually giving us that edge definition. Okay. So now the other thing that was mentioned is texture and clarity. All right. So if we bring the texture up, okay, you notice now what's happening is that we're getting that micro contrast along the edges, and we also gained a slight little bit of saturation. All right. So now we're getting this image to come a little bit into where we want to go. All right. And what is it we want? We want to see a little bit more definition within all the strands. We want to see some darkening of the shadows. All right. So we are pretty darn close already just with, those couple of sliders. Okay. I don't like pushing the texture up too high because sometimes this gives you some really strange artifacts, but you have to kind of judge it by what it is that you are photographing. All right. Okay, so now let's see if we can manipulate our shadows. Okay, if we look at the histogram, the histogram is also going to inform us a little bit about our tonal range. All right, so if we look at the exposure range in comparison to the full dynamic range, we have room in our blacks and we have a lot of room in our highlights. Okay. Let me see if we can zoom in here. All right. Notice how we are nowhere close to being at that white point edge. All right. So that far edge is our white point. Okay. Likewise, if we go over to the shadows, we are a little bit closer to shadows than our whites, but we are nowhere near to being at the full black point. Okay. So this is something now that we can say, okay, let's experiment with our white point and our black points. Okay. So how do we do that? With the black and white sliders. And one of the nice little tricks I've covered in the past, but you guys may have forgotten about it because I don't talk about it too often, is we can visualize our black and white points by with our slider by pressing down the Alt key. All right, and then when we move the black slider, okay, when we start seeing these little specks of black, all right, that's an indicator of where pixels are going to black with no detail. All right, black with no detail. Okay, so typically as soon as I start seeing those little specks, I bring it back until they just disappear. Okay, and now let's see if we can, that's before and that's after. all right, before and after, all right, and you can already see that we're starting to gain a little bit of contrast, because what we're doing is we're now utilizing the full dynamic range of our image rather than just the exposure range, all right? And we can do the same thing with our whites. Press and hold the Alt button, and then if we move it, okay, as soon as you start seeing these little white speckles, all right, those are all your highlights, okay? Now, typically, any specular highlights that goes white, it's not that big a deal, okay? But here, let me, and you can see I'm pushing it all the way to 100, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it back until they just disappear, all right? And that's it, okay? But if I want a little bit more specularity, all right, but you notice what it's doing to that saturation, okay? Because everything is connected. The white slider is connected to our lights, which is connected to our midtones, and so on. So whenever I push the whites a little bit further, all right, it's going to drag everything behind it. All right, so whites is one of those that I'm probably not going to go as heavy, all right, and just kind of keep it to into the highlights, not necessarily the whites, okay? Now,
I remember, I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I remember about a year ago, you had a class and we were talking about separation of color,
Mm-hmm.
but we went to black and white and adjusted the photograph in black and white and then went back to the color.
Yeah.
And that seemed to work quite, in fact, I use that quite a bit still.
Mm-hmm.
Would that work here?
Well, you know what? We can try it. The thing that I find with that technique is useful for images that have a bunch of different colors. This is more monochromatic, whereas so you know, if we were to, you know, take, actually let's do it right now. If we were to take where is it? Our color mixer, all right, saturation, all right, so we want our saturation, right? And this has everything from red to magenta, all right, and kind of like the secondary colors and tertiary colors, all right. But if we look at the magenta slider, okay, it's not really affecting anything because there's no magenta. There's also no purple. There's also no blue. There's also no aqua. There's no green. There is a little bit of yellow, all right, but the yellow, remember what we discussed earlier, the yellow is kind of like a side effect of that red going towards the brighter side, okay? So everywhere we see the highlights, all right, we're going to see some yellow, all right? So even that, it's not really doing anything. What we'll probably see more of an influence is in the reds and oranges, okay? And if we do that, you're going to notice that all it takes is a couple of points of movement either side to make a drastic, and I mean drastic, yes, drastic change. Okay. So you might be able to fine tune something this way, but I find that this is probably going to be like a last ditch effort stop. I would not go here first because it is such a great movement within this. Okay. All right. So we'll reset that. Send that. Okay. So I'd rather play around with the basic sliders first. Try to get my black and white points kind of set. All right. And then play around with maybe the vibrance and saturation a little bit. But you're going to find even with the saturation here, all right, it's going to behave the same exact way as the saturation level in the color. All right. So when we had this here, we move this. All right. Notice how we only need to move it a little tiny bit in order to make a big effort. All right. That's the same thing with the saturation here. All right. We only need to move a little tiny bit in order to make a big influence. All right. Because this saturation, while it targets all colors, because we're dealing with a monochromatic image, it's going to be the same as if we are using the slider here in our color mixer. Does that make sense? All right. They're both going to behave the same for this image because this image is just red. All right. All right. So right here, we've gone from here, an oversaturated red, to this. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, from here to here. Okay. Oversaturated, lack of contrast in the shadows. And now, what I want you to look at is like this upper area here. All right. These shadows. All right. Look at these shadows here. Okay. Look through the little strands. Okay. Because as soon as we look at those same areas here, all right, the contrast is a lot less because of the oversaturation of color. All right, everybody can see that? Okay. Now, if we want to bring our red back, we can just play around with this little saturation. All right, get it to the color we want, and we're good to go. Okay. There we go. Add a little bit more contrast in the shadows, and now we can see individual strands. All right. Bring up the vibrance just a little bit. All right, vibrance kind of just tackles anything that is not saturated is what vibrance tackles. All right, so what I did is I brought the saturation down just a touch, and if we touch it up with the vibrance, we have a little bit finer control over the color. All right, any questions on what I covered here? All right, we're getting into the weeds with color on this one. All right, so if at any point I lose you, please ask questions. Okay. All right. All right. So
I do have one question.
Yeah.
You did say you prefer to up the highlights instead of the whites, and this is where I always get confused at because that guy I like. Anyways, he teaches. He's written a lot of books. I have to go downstairs to look. He says up the whites, play with the whites and the blacks first to get your tonality.
well, no, The blacks and whites will set your black and white point. Okay. So if you think, I think you were present when I talked about everything being like an accordion.
Yes, you did, yeah.
Okay. And what we do is we have the slinky. Actually, let me, all right. We have, here is our dynamic range. Okay. So we have black here and we have white here. Okay. From this point, you cannot go blacker than black. And likewise, from this point here, you cannot go whiter than white. Okay. So for our dynamic range, we have 0% light to 100% light, correct? Okay. So now, if we have a histogram that kind of stops here and here, right? That means that our darkest pixel is, we'll just randomly give it a sign to, that darkest pixel is 10% black or 10% white. Okay, so it's very, very dark, but it's not black. Okay, and likewise, we have our lightest point, which we'll make this 80%, because usually we kind of favor the lights, right? So that means that no pixel within our image is going to be solid white. So if we were to print this, that means that there's absolutely no part of the paper that is going to not receive pigment. Okay. And there's no part of the paper that's not going to get 100% black. Right? It's only going to get 100% black. All right, which would be 90% gray. Okay. So now we got to say, okay, if we want to take advantage of the full dynamic range, we need to first analyze our image. Does our image contain anything that would have 100% black or 100% white? Okay. If that is the case, then what we will do is we will use the white slider to take this point here and shift it. And we'll take this point and shift it so that they now touch those corners. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. But because everything is a spring, that means all of these areas will also get shifted, all right, to varying degrees.
Oh,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when, depending on how far this distance is, all right, when you set your white point, it's going to make everything a little bit lighter. And from 50% to white, it's going to make all that lighter. And when you set your black point from 50%, to black, it's going to make it darker. All right. So that's not, I wouldn't say that is a default for all images, because not every image requires that dynamic range. Okay.
Okay.
Because it's not necessarily the dynamic range that we want, it's the exposure range that we're more concerned about. Okay. What looks natural? Okay. And even, for those of you who print, okay, you're not going to want to go all the way. Oops. You're not going to go all the way to the black and all the way to the white, because it's not going to print properly. Okay, you're going to want to come in into dark grays, and you're going to come in away from that white point. All right, because when you print, it tends your print tends to print darker, because now we're converting from an additive to a subtractive format. All right. So our exposure ranges, our exposure values are going to shift from what we see on the screen to what we see on in print. All right. And usually when it goes to print, things get a little darker. All right. So we're starting to get a little bit away from what we want here. All right. But hopefully that understanding tells you a little bit, gives you a little bit more information about how we manipulated the shadows and highlights in this particular image. Okay. So now let's go back and look at this. All right. In regards to our white point. Okay. Here's our white point. You can see that the first pixels are well away from that white point. Okay, well away. All right. So now if I want to bring those whites closer, all right, now you can see that the white point is now up against the corner here in our histogram, right? But look what it did to the image. All right, because everything else that was behind it kind of shifted in that direction. Okay, and it just made it a little bit too bright. It kind of ruined our saturation balance, and it just does not work. Okay. Let's bring it back to kind of where we were. All right. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any final questions on this kind of manipulation? Okay. Now, this is where we kind of just controlled our saturation and our contrast with just the basic sliders. Just everything that's in that basics tab, we were able to manipulate our image to a certain degree. Okay. This one here, all right, poses a little bit of a different problem, right? Because here we have an image that already has a lot of contrast. Okay, everybody can see that, we have a very definitive separation between dark areas, all right, by the dark stripes, all right, these dark stripes here. Let me just move that out of the way. All these dark stripes in relation to the red. There's already a large separation. The reds are, let's see, they're kind of all over the place. The reds are at about 80%. 80%. So they're a little bit brighter than 50% gray. All right. So they're about 80%. All right. And then the black areas All right, these are about 20%. Okay, 20% in the red. All right, and the blue and green, they're a lot darker, but in the reds, they're a lot brighter. All right, so you can see that this should be black, but there's a heavy, heavy red cast to it. All right, because of all the red light that's being bounced back from everything else. Okay. All right. Oops. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to, and even in these little highlights here, you can see that the highlights, again, they're not quite white. They're more that yellowish color, which doesn't really bother me because it kind of informs the fact that we are looking at highlights on a colored surface, all right? Even though they are specular highlights, all right? And the lights that were being reflected, they were gross color yellow anyway, all right? All right. So how can we do this? All right, well, one thing we can say, okay, well, the color temperature in the shadow part is very warm, all right? So maybe we can manipulate something with color temperature, okay? But remember, this is a global effect. So what happens is, while we can kind of counterbalance that color temperature on the stripes, we are also affecting the color of the red, and it's going more towards the magenta color now instead of being that true red. All right, so what can we do? Well, we can try to see if we can, maybe counterbalance that some other way, but it's still going to influence those black stripes, because all of these changes are global changes, all right? So that means anything we do to affect the dark is also going to affect the light, all right? So that may not be the best, okay? All right, well, we have our tone sliders, all right? And because there is a separation of contrast between the dark stripes and the red, maybe we can do something with that. All right, so let's try setting our black point. All right, and pressing and holding the Alt key, we can see that now we're starting to get some of these stripes in. All right. But I'm bringing the stripes, the black point in a lot. So you can see that everything that's gone to black is black pixels with no detail whatsoever. All right, so once they go black, they never go back. That's it. We're losing detail. Okay. And lo and behold, we get a certain amount of good results, but it also darkened the red. Why? Because again, everything's connected. Okay, so as we push everything towards the black, all our midtones are also being moved that way. What can we do? Well, let's create a little separation by taking our exposure, which is our midtones, and bringing those to the light side. Okay. All right, but now what happens is the saturation really starts getting out of hand, and this fine detail with all this ribbing now suddenly starts getting lost. All right, so let's zoom in. Okay, you can see, all right, so before, after, before, after. So all those dark lines that we have here, I don't know if you guys can see it. Dark line, dark line, dark line, dark line. Okay. that's the shadow from the ribbing. It was cloth. Okay. Gets lost. Why? Because we're taking those midtones and we're pushing them. We're pushing them towards the white. All right. And everything that is to the light side of that is getting pushed, but we're also raising the saturation. We're washing everything out with saturation. So now, all of a sudden, all those shadows start disappearing. Okay? So that's not going to give us a good result. All right? So let's bring this back. All right? So in this situation, what might work, I'm just going to cool this off just a little bit. Okay. The solution here is not so much in our, there we go. We'll bring the highlights out. It's not so much in the global controls. We're going to have to deal with this on a more local control. Okay. So understanding that, giving you that hint, knowing that it's going to be a local control, what can we do? And who wants to venture a guess? Anybody? Venture a guess?
Yeah.
Making you think too hard, huh?
Yes.
All right. I should challenge you guys more often. That's what I ought to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Throw some stuff at us.
Okay.
We might surprise you.
After a day of eating, overeating.
Oh, that old excuse. Sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I always say now, well, because of my age, but what was my excuse when I was younger?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. So what are local controls? What does it mean to have a local control?
To mask.
To mask. Exactly. Perfect. All right. So now we have to figure out how to mask certain areas. All right. And in this particular case, we can use a color mask. We can use the different colors because this whole image is red. All right. There's literally no other color beside red in this particular image. But what we want to do is we want to take the darker red and push it to black while keeping the middle tone red where it is. Okay. And in particular, any of the detail in the middle tone parts of the body that creates those stripes, we want to preserve that. We don't want to lose those. Okay. So as a matter of fact, if we use our texture slider, we can bring, and I usually use texture and clarity both at the same time. It's just my thing. And usually whatever, and again, it's my thing. It's not necessarily the correct way. Some people actually do it the opposite, where they'll push clarity further than texture. I tend to push texture further than clarity. So usually whatever texture I add, I'm about halfway with clarity, and it works well for me. Okay. So what that does is it brings all this detail here in the ribbing. All right. We're adding that micro contrast in those midtones. All right. In order to bring that detail out. Okay. But it didn't do anything for our major stripes. These are still looking like that dark red color. Okay. So now, one of the things that was recently added Well, one of the things we can do is we can create a range mask, okay? Range mask by saying, okay, I just want to target anything that is at, from black to like, whatever your dark pixels that create those stripes are. It says, I want to target that range because I'm going to take that targeted range and I'm going to shift it. Okay. Actually, I'm going to take it from here and I'm going to shift it to the black side. Okay. But if I give it a range, what's going to happen is it's going to also target some of these stripes, which isn't necessarily that bad an idea, but I have to be careful, all right, and what I target. Okay, so that's one option. But we also have another option that was added very recently, and that's in our color mixer. We have point color that was just recently added, point color. Okay. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to target a very specific color. All right. And in this particular case, because these stripes are pretty much all that darker red, we can say, okay, I want to target that color red. Okay. And the nice thing about this is we can, let me delete that swatch. Okay. We can say, all right, where along here, anywhere along any of these dark ones do I want to sample from? All right. And if we look carefully, you can see that towards the corners, it's a little bit darker. All right. Than towards the center. So I might not want to sample all the way out here. And I might not want to sample all the way from the interior. I might find something kind of like in the middle. All right. And that's going to create a sample point. Okay. Now, let me close the histogram so we can kind of expand this a little bit. All right. All the way at the bottom, we have a visualize range. Visualize range. Okay. And everything above that, this is kind of all pre-selected for you by that initial color selection. All right. One of the things that I do is I go to the visualize range, and when I click on it, what happens is Lightroom says, okay, whatever color you picked, anything within that range of color that is selected, I'm going to show you the color. Everything outside of that point color selection that's not within range, I'm going to convert it to black and white. So it allows you to kind of see exactly what parts of the image are being targeted by that point color. Okay? Make sense? All right. So now we can see, if we look closely up in these corners, all right, because the corners were a little bit darker, you can see that it's picking up a little bit of influence in the brighter red that is a little bit on the dark side. All right. So we can, at this point, make a decision based on this new information of what Lightroom is going to affect. So we can say, all right, does it matter to this particular image if we also darken these little areas in the corner? All right, so this is going to be a decision that you need to make. Or you can say, no, I don't want it to influence that. I want it to just influence the stripes. All right. So then we can go down to these sliders here and fine tune our selection. All right. So for example, we have our hue range, hue meaning color. All right. So we have a wide range from that point color. Remember, it kind of goes to either side and says, okay, I'm not just picking this one color, but I'm picking a selected range around that dark red. Okay. The saturation range, all right, it also not only the color, but it also says how bright or how dark the adjacent pixels are to that point color, and then the luminosity. Okay. Saturation, how intense or less intense the color is, and then the luminosity, how dark or how light. Okay, so we can manipulate those. All right, so up in these corners we can say, okay, well, it's kind of like on that cusp of being the light part, so maybe I don't want to influence that. I'm going to come down to our luminosity, all right? And we can see that we have a range from black all the way to white, okay? And we want to take, not white, I'm sorry, the lightest color red that's being influenced, okay? And we can say, I don't want to influence that part. I'm going to bring it in, okay? And we can even go here and bring that in a little bit further. And now, if we look up here, you can see that what was being influenced previously, because we can see a lot of the color, it's no longer being influenced. All right, everybody can see that? Okay. So now we can see that the only thing that's being targeted are all my dark red stripes, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want to target. And even on the inside here, right, we go on the inside, okay, you can see that it's really not targeting any of the ribs or any of the in-between areas, okay? All right, so now we can manipulate just the stripes. So what do I want to do? Okay. Well, I want to make them look black. I don't want to make them look dark red. All right. So that means I'm going to now come up to the upper part here. These are my controls. I can control the hue shift, so I can make it more magenta. I can make it more orange, okay? The saturation, I can raise or lower the saturation level of the selected area, or the luminosity, I can make them lighter or darker, all right? So in this case, what do I want to do? I want to make it darker, all right? So I'll bring my luminosity down, all right? And you can see that it's making everything darker. However, it's making the red darker, right? It's not changing the color. What do we want to do with the color? We want to make it black. So how do we do that? Well, let's try lowering the saturation, okay? But here's a little trick. Try oversaturating it, all right? And you'll find that sometimes that's going to give you a richer black, all right? Rather than desaturating it, because now when we desaturate it, what we're getting is straight black, no color, all right? But we have to keep in mind that everything within our image is going to influence this. So we want some color influence, all right? So I don't want to remove all the color from black, all right? So unless that's what you want. So I could either oversaturate it, okay, and by oversaturating it, it kind of flattens it a little bit. And because we're oversaturating dark colors, just by going dark kind of desaturates everything anyway, in a way. So this is going to give us a slightly richer black, all right, but it's entirely up to you. I think I'm just going to make it not as red, all right, and I think that's going to look good, okay. At any point, you can say, okay, how does that look? We can come back down to our visualize range and turn that off, okay? All right, and you can see that it's kind of maybe influenced a little bit, so I'm going to bring my saturation range closer to that dark part, okay? There we go. Everybody see that? Okay, so now what I've done is I've created that contrast. No, I'm sorry. I've expanded the contrast by manipulating the color in the dark areas in an already contrasty image. Okay, so what I basically did is I got rid of the color cast in the dark areas that made everything kind of washed out looking. All right. Obviously, not very many images are going to, kind of fit this scenario. But what I find is when dealing with flowers, sometimes that happens depending on, if you have like a cluster of really colorful flowers and that color kind of affects everything else around it. All right. So this is a nice way of being able to control it. All right, any questions on this? This one was fairly simple because we literally just used one tab, the point color tab, to control our color. Yes, no?
I never, I'm glad that you brought up the point color up, because I wasn't aware of that, and that is such a useful tool. As you mentioned in flowers, right
Yeah.
there. You pick the color you want, you adjust it, and then you enhance it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When did that come to? Is that something new?
It's fairly new. Yeah. About a year, I think.
Yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
about 10 years behind.
Maybe a little less than a year.
Yeah, it hasn't been too long. You're right, Bill. It may be a little less than a year.
This is the first time I've seen how it works. I know it's there. It's like, yeah, I'll look it up someday. But it's the first time I've seen it.
Yeah. So, and the nice thing, all right. Okay, we kind of did this as a global adjustment, okay, meaning it targeted the entire image, okay, but there are times where we want to manipulate something like this using point color, but we don't want to do it globally. Maybe we want to do something locally, okay.
You know what I would want to use point color? I have to play with this. A lot of times when, as you know, I'm out in the woods a lot, there are different colors of green.
Yes.
There's certain things, I'd like to darken the light greens without affecting the dark greens.
Exactly. Yes. And the point color is perfect for that. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Here is a more traditional image that you guys would get. All right. You're out photographing flowers, and there's all kinds of stuff behind the subject, and we want to now enhance the flower. Okay, now I mentioned earlier that when I photographed this, it was already kind of sitting. It was sitting under a big display, so it was in the shade of the display. It was the display was on the side, so it was kind of close to a wall, and there was maybe 3 feet. So not only was it under the shade of the upper part of the display, but being so close to the wall, there was not enough light getting into that little section. So I really, had to jam it up there. I mean, I'm shooting at 1600 ISO, all right? So because the light was so flat, what happens is we suffer in the contrast of the image. We lose a lot of contrast to begin with because we don't have any kind of directional light. All right. So the other thing is that all our colors look kind of washed out. And if you notice, these background flowers, all right, these background flowers, they're supposed to be yellow, all right? And the main flower, and there's actually another little one here, is supposed to be red, okay? But also there is some stuff going on here that is kind of like a brownish red that was in this display here. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to target that central flower, but I don't want to target any of the other red in the area. All right, so if I were to use a global point color, what happens is if I manipulate this central flower with the global point color, it's also going to affect this one here. It's going to affect these areas of red, all these areas of red. Okay, so I don't want to do that. All right, so the nice thing about the point color is we can use point color within a mask. All right, so the first thing I want to do with this image is obviously let's bring the exposure up. Okay, and let me bring my histogram back down. All right, and you can see that we are right up, well, this is where reading your histogram and understanding your histogram a little bit kind of plays. If we notice, the blue channel is pushed up against that far wall of black, okay? But just the blue channel. If we look at the red and the green channel, okay, you can see that hump of green, that comes down to just touching that black point corner, right? And where the blue, the green, and the red channels overlap, it turns to that very light color gray, and you can see where it's kind of the shape of the red also doesn't quite come to the corner. All right, so our black point is almost there, but only in the blue channel. Make sense? All right, so that tells me that if I were to manipulate that black point, it's just going to take all of my dark shadows and just going to crush them. So my black point is pretty much where I want it to be. All right. My well, let me get rid of this. Oh, no, let me bring my white point, on the other hand, is well away, all right, from the white point corner. As a matter of fact, my white point, my exposure range, the lightest pixels don't go anywhere into my whites. They're all within my highlights. All right, hopefully you guys can see that. Okay. So now I can make a decision. All right, do I want to set my white point? Do I want to take all these pixels, all these pixels that are in my lights, and shift them over to my whites? Okay. Again, talking about what you learned, Bill. All right. Now that you understand a little bit of my philosophy, what is your thinking? I'm going to put you to the gun here. All right.
Maybe I would want to play with the highlights first.
The highlights are already there.
Okay.
All right. You can, if,
okay,
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. You can see all those pixels within that little highlight section. All right. So now my question to you is, do you want to see any of those pixels go to the whites? All right. Because, and this is where I'm going to argue with that guy that,
I'm going to say no because I happen to like I happen to like how light that is.
Exactly.
I don't want to make it any lighter.
Exactly.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I would even go and argue that corner that's very bright,
Yeah.
I would probably want to darken that down.
Yes.
All right.
Because I don't want my eye
Yes.
going to that.
Okay. So I would. That's why I strongly say make your decisions based on the image, not on this generic set white point, set black point.
Okay.
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 Because in this particular case, setting the white point, all right, so let's do that just so you can see it. Press Alt, bring my whites tab, all right, and all right, see now that is our white point showing. All right, so usually when I see it, I bring it back until it just disappears, okay, and look at that. Now, we can look at the flower, all right, and say, well, it kind of did something really, really well with the flower, all right? And we could even argue that it did something really, really well with the background, okay? So manipulating the white point does do something positive to the image. You can see that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the negative part kind of kills it for me. All right. So now I made my white point correction, but now I have to undo that whole part. So for me, I'd rather not do global white point like that, and just manipulate the midtones, okay, which is going to get me to do the same thing, okay. So if I were to bring my highlights up, all right, and my shadows, okay, and bring my whites down, all right, we can kind of sort of get there, all right, before, after, without really making that bright area go nuclear. Okay. All right, but I wouldn't even do that. I would tackle this one a little bit more with local adjustments rather than global adjustments. Okay, so local adjustments now allows me to say, okay, I want to control my subject, which is the big flower, independently of the background. All right, because I don't want to bring up the luminosity of the background and the luminosity of the subject at both at the same level. All right, it's not going to work. All right, I want that background to remain a little bit darker in order to bring a little bit more attention to my subject. All right, it's basic editing 101. All right. And as a matter of fact, I would probably take and burn down this corner to begin with. All right. Okay. So I am going to make a few global adjustments because I do want to kind of get a head start in that general direction. All right. So let's see. I'm going to go up a little bit on my exposure. All right. Let's see what happens with contrast. Okay. Oh, actually adding a little bit of contrast is not too bad. All right. Why does contrast work here when it didn't work previously? Okay. It's on a per image basis. In this particular image, we have a lot of other colors going on. All right. And not only do we have a lot of colors, but we also have a lot of texture going on. And we already have a lot of already established shadows to work with. Whereas previously, this one here, we didn't have a lot of shadows to begin with. So moving that contrast slider for this image failed, but moving the contrast slider for this image works. All right. Can everybody see that? All right. So this is where, on a per image basis, you have to analyze it. All right. So let's bring up the exposure a little bit. All right. And as I bring up the exposure, you're going to notice that my reds kind of go a little nuclear, and my yellows, which has like a little tint of green, are going neon. All right. You know how neon colors kind of like vibrate? That's what we're getting. All right. So this is where now local adjustments come into play. All right. Actually, before we do that, let's try one more. Let's try adding a little bit of texture and clarity. Oh yeah, that adds a little bit of separation. Okay. Now, what I want you to do, actually, let me zoom in. Oh, too much in. Let's go to 100%. All right, 100%. Okay. I want you to pay attention to the colors in this. All right. Before, after. Before, after. All right. In particular, pay attention to the tips of all these petals. No contrast whatsoever. All very monochromatic, just this glowing neon red. Now we have a little bit of definition with all the petals. We have these nice little colored highlights. The yellow was already there. All right. It was so washed out by the red color cast that we lose it. All right. Also, because it was underexposed, we lose that saturation contrast. As soon as we correct it, we start seeing all this beauty now start coming out of our image. Okay. All right. we want to enhance this a little bit more. All right, so now what we're going to do, actually, I'm looking at that background and I'm not liking that, how bright that background is. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my global adjustment for the background. I'm going to ignore the subject. I just want to look at the background and say, okay, what's going to look good to my eye? And I think right about there. So we're about, 0.2 on the plus on the exposure, okay? The flower's still washed out. So now we're going to go to one of my favorites, which is the radial gradient. And I'm going to make a gradient the size of my subject, all right? The inner circle, of course, creates your feathering buffer zone, all right? Doesn't need to be too extreme, all right? I want the majority of that flower kind of within that inner circle, all right? Because I want the majority of the effect that I'm going to apply to this targeting the flower, all right? And it's going to kind of fade off as in the feather, and I don't want it to fade off within the flower. I want it to fade outside of the flower, okay? So what's the first thing I want to do? Well, obviously, I want to make this a little bit brighter, all right? So let's make that a little bit brighter. Okay, as we get a little bit brighter, we also start getting a little bit nuclear with that red. So let's bring our shadows down, all right, and reintroduce some of that contrast, okay? And this is going to be a little bit of a balance. We can even try, all right, highlights. All right, that's looking a lot better, okay? Then I'm going to go to the effects panel and I'm going to add texture and clarity again. All right, texture and clarity again. Oh, there it is. Let me reset that. All right, texture and clarity. And I don't need to add as much as previously, but wow, look at that now popping forward. Okay, and here is where you can play around with your values to kind of find that balance where you're not blowing out the color, all right, and you're still brightening the flower, okay? Make sense? All right. Then we can go to our point color, okay, and we can select one of these reds here, all right, anywhere on the flower. And now we have a point color selected, and we can then, just like previously, let me collapse the histogram, all right, we can manipulate everything we can with the global, we can now do with the local, all right? So we can do a visualize, all right? Now, it's going to look different when you press the visualize because this is now a local adjustment. So it's only going to visualize within the circle of our radial gradient. Make sense? That's why you're seeing everything around it kind of still in color. All right, it's this inner part. All right, and you can see that it's kind of affecting that red that I mentioned was behind the flower. Okay, and even some of this orange here, it's still being affected. Okay, so now we can say, okay, how much of a hue range do we want? All right, and we can say, okay, I'm going to get away from the orange. Okay, and I want to get away from like the lighter parts. Okay. And now we can say, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to make it a little bit lighter? Do I want to, make my saturation? All right. And in this case, I might want to make it a little bit more red. Luminosity. Okay. That's starting to look nuclear. All right. So let's back that off a little bit. All right. The other thing we can do is we can go right up here and we can manipulate this point, and you'll see that it's controlling the hue, so we can make it more magenta, we can make it more yellow, okay? And we can, up and down is going to be our saturation, right? So you can see the point we selected, it's pretty much all the way to the top. So that tells us that original color is very well saturated, all right? So we might want to just drop it down a little bit and make it less saturated, okay? And then here on the side, this is our luminosity, all right? We can make it darker, we can make it lighter, okay? Obviously, little steps for this will go a long way, all right? So we're gonna go a little bit on the red side, a little less saturation, okay, and a little bit on the darker. All right. Take the visualization off. All right. And this is before, this is after. Before, see how it's kind of on the orangey side? We made it go a little bit more to the magenta side. Shift, okay? Because what I want to do is I want to create some separation between the flower and the background. So I'm going to go to the cooler side to get away from the brighter, warmer background. Okay? All right. Oh, where's my point color? And you'll notice that, let me zoom in here. Notice how it's not touching any of the yellow here. Okay, the visualized range. All right, it's not affecting that yellow-green color. Okay, it's just touching the red. As a matter of fact, all this deep shadow red, it's not even touching that. Okay, which is fine by me. All right. Oops, come on. All right. So now we're getting there. All right. What I want to do is I have a preset that's going to give me a little bit of a vignette mask. All right. And all that's going to do is it's going to darken the outside. Okay. And then the last mask I want to do, all right, is I'm going to add another radial gradient. All right. And in this particular case, I'm just going to place it right here in the corner. All right. And I'm going to take my white point and drop it down. Just darken it up. Okay. Let's see. All right. Or depending, it may not work for this one, but I'm going to try it. All right. Let's do a point color on this bright area here, okay, and see what happens. So let's bring the visualization up. All right, you can see it did a pretty good job just picking that background color. All right, so let's take that and just make that background color darker. Okay, let's turn the visualization off. All right, look at that. All right. And if we want, we can just manipulate our feather edge, make sure. There we go. Okay. Turn it off, turn it on. Okay. Any questions on point color? All right. and then before, after, before, after. Any questions?
No, I like the results though, in that far right corner. That was, you
Mhm.
know, when I first saw it, I said, oh, that was blown out.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
wondering how are you gonna do that?
Okay, but if you remember, it was not blown out. It was not blown out.
Okay,
Okay, it was well within the our exposure range. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even anywhere near the whites part of the slide of the histogram.
true.
Okay,
True.
so but what makes it look blown out is the fact that that corner, that little corner was the brightest spot of everything. So it just kind of screamed at you, look at me. All right. So yeah, knocking it down. All right. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Now I have one other image here. Okay. But I literally did the same thing as that one with the flower, okay, where I just used actually in this case I added a little bit of coolness to cool down everything, and use a radial filter on our subject, okay, to now take their color and warm it back up, okay, and bring up our highlights, okay, add a little bit of texture to it, and that's pretty much it. Before, after. All right, so sometimes you don't need to do a lot to an image, you know, in order to really bring it out. Okay. Any questions? No questions? Or did I destroy brain cells and
No, you did great. I mean, you know, now I have something else, another tool in my bag.
all right, awesome.
I'm just figuring out how I'm going to use this and where.
Yeah. You know, experiment.
Yes.
You know, experiment. I find that the point color works best in areas that are more of not necessarily flat color, but large groups of a particular color. All right. Where I find it doesn't work well is in like those really smooth blue skies. Um, it just the tonality differences in that blue gradient are very very close to each other. That if you do a you know a point color adjustment on it, you have to have a very light touch, otherwise it becomes very noticeable where the tonal range is just at those borders. If you're not careful about what the range is you're selecting, it can do some really really weird things, and create some unusual artifacts. So you have to be careful with large areas of very subtle color differences. All right, something that's a little bit more textured, but yet has clumps of very distinct color, it works better for something like this. Okay. All right. That's pretty much it I have for you guys today.
My tool bag is getting full. I just have to learn how to use them. You know, I got a lot of tools. hey, I'm pulling out of it. What's this again? How do is that, I'm probably using it upside down again.
I find that if I don't start playing with this next day, then the next time I sit down, I go, what do you say?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, like anything you want to learn, you have to practice it. It's as simple as that. You have to practice it.
Put the time in.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, with these lessons, I kind of give you a lot of stuff. All right. But what I find is that there are certain tools that tend to be the go-to that I tend to use a lot when I edit. So I don't necessarily use all the tools that are at my disposal. Okay. Obviously, having an understanding of those other tools does help when you find those situations that it's like, my normal go-to edit isn't working. What do I do? And that's when you pull out one of these little, these little nuggets and say, that's it. But for the most of my editing, I have just the basic things that I tend to go to. Okay. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of incentive to experiment. Okay. All right. All right, gentlemen.
All right.
Oh, let me stop the share. Okay. All right. And don't forget, Bill dropped the thing in regards to the photography exhibition in the chat. If you're interested in supporting our local photographers, by all means, go check it out. Hopefully I'll make it on Wednesday. Okay, Bill?
Thank you.
I'm going to drag the wife. I know Diane wants to go, all right, because I've discussed it with her. She does want to go. But like I said, I have a doctor's appointment that afternoon.
Well,
So
there's always the 24th if you can't make
yeah.
it.
Okay.
Or if the two of you want to come up, if you can't make it either or, the two of you want to come up, just let me know and we'll set a time.
Okay. All right. I don't see any problem for Wednesday. So
Good.
okay.
All right.
We just won't be there for opening.
Okay, good.
All right. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much once
Thank
again.
you.
I
Thank
do
you.
appreciate you. Yeah, Bob, you have something?
No, but I guess I have to use a lot of that flower stuff. I
There
think
you
that's gonna
go.
help immensely.
There you go. All right. One of these days, we're going to dedicate an episode for you guys to show off your work. All right.
By the way, Doc, when
Yeah.
when you come to the exhibit, you're going to see some red. I'll point something out to you.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Okay.
As always, be safe. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.